I definitely wanted to understand Juneteenth and the history behind it. And I know a lot of our players have a lot of questions in terms of what is Juneteenth and really regarding Black Lives Matters.
Yeah.
They want to see it as, some people see it as anti-white rather than a different kind of movement.
Yeah.
And I want to see your take and your perspective on that, hearing that people see it as anti-white and what Juneteenth means to you.
Right. So I think the first thing is Juneteenth is the celebration of when every free person of color finally became aware that they were free. So the Emancipation Proclamation happened, but 2 years later, there were still Black people enslaved in Texas, Galveston, Texas to be exact. And it took 2 years for them to learn of their freedom. And so the celebration of Juneteenth is the celebration of coming into the knowledge of, I am emancipated, I am liberated, I have independence that I did not once have. So the celebration of Juneteenth is a celebration of liberation. It's not a celebration of, one, if you will, one idea over the other. It's a celebration that if indeed America is supposed to be the land of the free and the home of the brave, it's that for everybody.
Yeah.
And now we finally get to embrace that. We finally get to take part in that.
Yeah.
And I think what we're seeing when you talk about the conversation around Black Lives Matter and the current movement for liberation, not just with Black people, but for marginalized people all over this country,
Yes.
Black Lives Matter is the same declaration of my life is worth something. My experience in this country is worth something. It doesn't diminish the experiences of others. In fact, when people say things like all lives matter, the reason why I think there's some conflict on that is because inherently in saying one person and their experience matters, everyone does exist, right?
Yes.
But there is nothing wrong with taking the time to look at the history, the culture, the pain, and the triumph of each community. And that's what Black Lives Matter truly means at its core, right?
Yeah.
And so that's how people are linking the two.
Yes. And going through the tour today, there's a big underlying theme of positivity, kind of meeting that with, we won't take your violence to diminish us, and they're taking the positive routes and kind of bringing themselves up and uprooting themselves. So when you hear certain things trying to diminish Black Lives Matters or trying to warp it into something different that it wasn't meant to stand for, how do you tend to approach that and discuss that when people approach you like that?
Right. Well, I think there's a difference between the slogan or the anthem, Black Lives Matter, and the understanding that Black lives actually matter in this country.
Yes.
So I think that there are people who can take anything and twist it or turn it to fit their imagination of what, if they want to do that, right?
Yeah.
So the conversation that I always try to bring people back to is what is the foundational conversation we're having? Is it a conversation about whether or not poverty has happened in this country, whether or not racism has happened in this country, whether or not people, one set of people have been marginalized differently than others? Let's talk about that. We don't have to even say Black Lives Matter in the context of talking about justice, in the context of talking about liberation. It's just now when we say Black Lives Matter, if you feel offended by that, it's now an opportunity to have a conversation about those things. So I always say Black Lives Matter gives us an opportunity to have a conversation that we may not have had, a good one or a challenging one, because all of our justice faults have started with someone asking a question about why is something the way it is? Should it be this way? Should we continue to move forward that way? So I'm not afraid of hard questions, and I don't think you're afraid of hard questions, and that's why you're here today. So if we have to use Black Lives Matter, or we have to use different conversations or different things to get us to the point of having a courageous conversation with each other, I'm all for it.
Okay, and my last question just kind of deals with what you said about finding that base of foundation and understanding of what lies behind your real question. And I'm sure you've had difficult conversations with people where it kind of feels like it's going nowhere and you're butting heads. As an educator, and so for myself and anyone that's watching, how do you find that you deal with it when you start to butt heads and it seems like no one's going anywhere?
Right. I think the first thing is to establish rules of the conversation from the beginning, right? If we're not going to have a conversation where we're both willing to walk away learning something, or willing to be open to something new, or willing to be wrong, or willing to be challenged, then we probably shouldn't have a conversation.
Yeah.
You're not ready to have that conversation. And so only when you're ready to actually hear a broader aspect of what's going on, are you really ready to have that conversation?
Yeah.
And that's on both sides. Sometimes the trauma and pain on both sides is still so deep that people are not yet ready to have that conversation, and we have to make room for that. So our role really here at the Institute is to create space for those conversations, to create programs and opportunities for people who may still be struggling with some of those concepts, right, around justice and liberation and Black Lives Matter. And it's not, like I said, we're a human rights conversation is what we create human rights conversations as well. So people might be wondering, like, what's going on in Haiti? What's going on in Israel? What's going on in all these different places? We want people to have those courageous conversations in a space that's rooted in the ultimate conversation of justice and equality for all.
Yeah.
And so I try to just, from the very beginning, what's the point? What we trying to do here? And if you just want to argue, I ain't got time to that, right? We got a lot more to do. But if you really want to learn, if you want to get to know me, if you want to have a shared experience, if you want to start somewhere with me and let's grow together in this conversation, then I welcome it. Yeah.
I really appreciate you saying willing to be wrong. I think that's very important. That's what I definitely struggled with, like just having a simple conversation with my brother. Yeah. You have to be willing to be wrong if you jump into a conversation. And I definitely appreciate your time, and it's very nice to meet you.
It was love. Thank you.
Thank you for helping us.